Welcome back. Sit down, because what you are about to hear is something nobody talks about openly. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a dynamic so psychologically explosive, it will permanently change how you see both empaths and narcissists forever. Everyone assumes the empath is always the victim. Always the one bleeding on the floor. Always the one crying in the dark while the narcissist walks away untouched. That is the story we have been told. But that story is dangerously incomplete. Because here is the question that haunts every narcissist who has ever targeted an empath, the question they will never ask out loud, the question that keeps them awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. What happens when the empath finally gets angry? Not the quiet, apologetic anger the narcissist is used to managing. Not the anger that collapses into tears and begging. We are talking about something far darker. Far more precise. Something the narcissist never saw coming, and was never prepared for. You see, the empath spent years studying the narcissist. Not intentionally. Not strategically. But through pain. Through betrayal. Through 1,000 invisible wounds. And pain, when it reaches a certain depth, transforms into something the narcissist cannot manipulate. It transforms into clarity. This video is not about revenge. This is not a celebration of cruelty. This is a psychological autopsy of what truly happens when an empath's patience expires, and why that moment is the single most terrifying event in a narcissist's carefully constructed world. Stay with me, because what empaths do when they are angry is not what you expect. It is not screaming. It is not drama. It is not a meltdown. It is something far more devastating to a narcissist's core, and far more misunderstood by the outside world. The narcissist built an entire empire on one foundation, the empath's emotional availability. Their willingness to feel, to forgive, to explain, to stay. Remove that foundation, and the entire structure begins to shake. What the empath does in anger removes that foundation completely. We have seen what narcissists do to empaths in academic studies, in trauma therapy rooms, in support groups across the world. But today, we flip the lens entirely. Today, we examine what happens on the other side of that relationship when the empath stops being soft. By the end of this video, you will understand something profound, that the empath's anger is not a weakness finally breaking. It is a superpower finally awakening. And for the narcissist, that awakening is nothing short of psychological catastrophe. To understand what the empath does, you must first understand what the narcissist fears most. Not failure. Not public humiliation. Not even abandonment, though that comes close. What the narcissist fears above all else is being truly seen. Exposed. Known completely, and rejected anyway. The narcissist constructed a false self like an architect builds a fortress. Every wall designed to keep the real, fragile interior hidden. Every interaction calculated to extract admiration while revealing nothing authentic. This fortress took decades to build. The empath dismantles it in a single conversation. Here is what most people miss. The empath, by nature, is a profound psychological observer. They do not just feel emotions. They map them. They trace emotional patterns the way a detective traces evidence. Years inside a narcissistic relationship gave the empath an intimate blueprint of the narcissist's entire psychological architecture. The narcissist always believed the empath's sensitivity was a weakness to exploit. What they never understood is that sensitivity is also a form of sonar. Every lie the narcissist told, the empath felt as a frequency. Every manipulation registered as a vibration. The empath catalogued all of it, silently, painfully, completely. When the empath gets angry, they do not reach for drama. They reach for truth. Specific, documented, undeniable truth. They begin naming behaviors the narcissist thought were invisible. They begin describing patterns the narcissist believed were buried. And they do it with the cold, quiet precision of a surgeon. The narcissist's entire psychological survival depends on one thing: narrative control. They must control the story. Who the villain is. Who the victim is. What happened and what did not. The angry empath walks into that narrative and burns it to the ground with facts, receipts, and memory sharper than any blade. Psychologically, the narcissist operates from a place called the grandiose defense. It is the internal belief that they are superior, untouchable, and always right. This defense requires constant external confirmation. When the empath withdraws that confirmation entirely, the grandiose defense begins to crack from the inside. What makes the empath's anger so psychologically catastrophic for the narcissist is its quality. It is not reactive. It is not hysterical. It is grief that has finished weeping and transformed into resolve. It carries the weight of every moment the empath stayed silent, and the narcissist has no defense against that kind of weight. The narcissist thrives in emotional chaos. They are masterful at redirecting explosive emotions, playing victim inside someone else's storm, and flipping the script mid-conflict. But the empath's refined anger does not create a storm. It creates a silence so profound the narcissist's manipulation tactics echo uselessly inside it. Clinically, this dynamic mirrors what psychologists describe as the collapse of the narcissistic supply chain. The empath was the primary source of that supply, the validation, the emotional engagement, the forgiveness. When the empath's anger fully arrives, that supply does not slow down. It stops. Instantly. Completely. And the narcissist begins to starve. Here is where everything shifts. Here is the moment the narcissist never rehearsed for. The empath goes emotionally cold. Not cruel. Not vindictive. Cold in the way a winter sky is cold. Vast, clear, and completely indifferent to the narcissist's performance. The narcissist attempts their usual arsenal first. Love bombing resurfaces. Sudden affection, grand gestures, manufactured vulnerability. But the empath has seen this movie before. They know every line of the script. And so they watch the performance with detached recognition rather than emotional response. The trap has no power over someone who can see the mechanism. Then comes the guilt. The narcissist deploys guilt like a weapon, reminding the empath of sacrifices made, of history shared, of what they will lose by walking away. But something inside the empath has already completed its grieving. They grieved while still inside the relationship. They have no grief left to weaponize. The dramatic shift happens when the empath begins to disengage publicly. Not with announcements. Not with explosions. Simply by removing themselves from the narcissist's narrative, no longer defending the narcissist to mutual friends, no longer softening the story, no longer protecting the narcissist's carefully curated image from the truth. This is what shatters the narcissist's world more than any confrontation ever could. The empath begins telling the real story. Quietly. Truthfully. Without embellishment, because embellishment is not needed. The real story, told plainly, is damning enough. And the narcissist's social ecosystem begins to shift beneath their feet. People who once saw the narcissist through the empath's forgiving eyes now see something different. Because the empath, in their anger, stopped translating the narcissist charitably. They stopped filling the silence with excuses. They stopped protecting someone who never once protected them. The power reversal is now fully visible. The narcissist, who spent years positioning themselves as the strong one, the one with options, with control, with superiority, now finds themselves in a desperate, reactive position. Reaching, calling, monitoring, panicking, while the empath grows quieter, stiller, and more resolute by the day. Psychologically, this is what researchers describe as narcissistic injury escalating into narcissistic collapse. The injury was the empath's withdrawal of admiration. The collapse is the narcissist's inability to self-regulate without an external emotional mirror. The empath was that mirror. Now the mirror has been removed, and the narcissist faces something they have spent a lifetime avoiding, themselves. The turning point deepens when the empath stops explaining themselves. No more justifications. No more attempts to make the narcissist understand. The empath simply acts. Moves. Decides. And each decision made without seeking the narcissist's approval is another brick removed from the narcissist's foundation of control. What the world witnesses in this chapter is not a victim fighting back. It is something far more powerful, a person who has finally remembered who they were before the narcissist redefined them. And that remembering is irreversible. You cannot unknow yourself. You cannot unfind your own power. That is the plot twist the narcissist cannot survive. The collapse of the narcissist does not look like what movies portray. It does not arrive with dramatic confessions or tearful apologies. It arrives quietly, disguised as aggression. The narcissist, unable to tolerate the loss of control, begins to escalate in increasingly transparent ways. Smear campaigns launch. The narcissist begins rewriting history aggressively, painting the empath as unstable, ungrateful, abusive, or mentally unwell. But here is the brutal irony. The empath's very calm in the face of these attacks becomes their most powerful defense. Composure, to onlookers, communicates truth far louder than any accusation. The narcissist begins making critical errors they never made when the empath was emotionally available to stabilize them. Without their primary source of supply providing emotional regulation, the narcissist's mask begins slipping in public, in conversations, on social media, in professional settings. The cracks become visible to people who once believed the facade completely. Internally, the narcissist is experiencing something that resembles psychological free fall. Their sense of identity, which was never authentically constructed but always borrowed from others' perceptions, begins to dissolve. Without the empath's emotional engagement to define them, they genuinely do not know who they are. This is the dark, brutal truth of narcissistic collapse. It is not just the loss of a relationship. It is the exposure of an emptiness the narcissist built their entire personality to conceal. The empath's anger, by removing the camouflage, has forced the narcissist to stand face to face with the void at their core. The social consequences compound rapidly. The carefully maintained image, the charming, misunderstood, generous persona, requires constant energy to sustain. Energy the narcissist was drawing from the empath's emotional labor. Without that fuel, maintenance of the image becomes exhausting, inconsistent, and ultimately impossible. Former allies begin asking questions. People who accepted the narcissist's version of events without question now encounter an empath who is no longer softening the narrative, and the contrast is striking. Truth, when finally spoken in full, has a texture that fiction cannot replicate. People begin to feel the difference. The narcissist attempts one final gambit, total destruction of the empath's credibility. A last, desperate surge of calculated chaos designed to make the empath appear to be the aggressor, the unstable party, the one to be avoided. But by this point, the empath has already left the battlefield. They are no longer playing the game. And you cannot destroy someone who has already walked away from the arena. What remains for the narcissist after the collapse is perhaps the harshest consequence of all, not public exposure, not social loss, but the unbearable confrontation with their own interior. No supply. No mirror. No empath to absorb their chaos and return it as forgiveness. Just themselves, alone, with every truth they spent decades running from, waiting silently on the other side of the silence. This chapter is dark because collapse is dark. But it is necessary. Because the narcissist's collapse is not a tragedy, it is a consequence. Precisely measured. Quietly delivered. Not by the empath's cruelty, but by the narcissist's own architecture finally meeting the weight of reality it was never built to carry. Now we arrive at the truth that this entire video was always building toward. The horrible thing the empath does to the narcissist when angry is not revenge. It is not retaliation. It is not even confrontation. The most devastating thing the empath does is simply this: they heal. They heal completely, visibly, and without looking back. And for the narcissist, watching someone they were certain they had broken rise, not just intact but transformed, is a wound that no manipulation tactic can reach, no supply can soothe, and no facade can conceal. The empath's healing is not performative. It is not posted for attention or designed to provoke. It is real, deep, and anchored in something the narcissist genuinely cannot access: authentic self-awareness. The empath returns to themselves. The narcissist has no self to return to. That asymmetry is the final, defining punishment. Here is what the healing looks like from the outside. The empath begins making decisions aligned with their own values. They begin attracting relationships built on genuine reciprocity. They begin thriving, not in spite of the pain they endured but because of what that pain refined in them. And every visible step forward is, to the narcissist, an invisible step deeper into isolation. The empath's anger, that fierce, quiet, finally arrived anger, was not destruction. It was a birth. The death of the version of themselves the narcissist had manufactured, the diminished, apologetic, perpetually forgiving shadow self, and the birth of someone who knows their value with a certainty that cannot be argued away. To every empath watching this right now who has not yet given themselves permission to be angry, hear this: your anger is not a character flaw. It is not something to manage or suppress or apologize for. It is information. It is signal. It is your nervous system telling you, in the loudest possible way, that what was done to you was not acceptable and was never your fault. The narcissist counted on your compassion to outlast your pain. They built their entire strategy on the assumption that your capacity to forgive would always exceed your capacity to walk away. The moment your anger proves that assumption wrong is the moment the entire dynamic permanently collapses. Not maybe. Not sometimes. Every single time. You were never the problem in that relationship. You were the solution the narcissist exploited until it could no longer be exploited. And now, on the other side of that anger, on the other side of that pain, you are something the narcissist can never manufacture and will always desperately need. You are real. The narcissist will find new mirrors, new sources of supply, new empaths to target and slowly diminish, because they have no other mode of survival. But none of those mirrors will ever reflect back to them what they truly wanted, which was not love, but proof that they existed, that they mattered, that they were enough. And that proof, because it was never internally generated, will always be one withdrawal away from disappearing. And you, the empath who finally got angry, who finally drew the line, who finally chose themselves, you carry the only thing that makes a human life genuinely meaningful, the capacity to feel deeply, love honestly, and still choose yourself when the cost of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving. That is not a flaw. That is the most powerful thing a human being can be. And no narcissist, no matter how calculated, no matter how relentless, can ever take that from you again.